what we're going to do is I am going to speak a little bit about some of the issues at Wiesenthal. I chose one issue to speak to you about for 2 minutes today. Then I'm going to hand it over to Freddie Wax, who will speak to you as well on behalf of the Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center Board. He is the chairman, and really we're thrilled to have him here with us. And then we'll be introducing our feature speaker that we're very much looking forward to, Dr. Einat Wilf, who will speak to us about her latest book. And then we'll open it up to questions and answers and conclude by about 5 o'clock. So once again, thank you all for joining us today for this important conversation. And as I said, in a few minutes, we're going to introduce Dr. Einat Wilf, who is here with us already on the line. And she'll discuss her latest book, The War of Return, How Western Indulgence of the Palestinian Dream Has Obstructed the Path to Peace. First, I'd like to spend a few minutes, as I said, telling you about, I guess, one important issue. There are many important issues that are going on that we've been tackling. And of course, since the coronavirus is a singular issue on everyone's mind, it's not surprising that somehow the anti-Semites have tried to use Jews as scapegoats for this pandemic. As I wrote in the National Post just a few weeks ago, we've seen efforts on social media to exploit and hijack fear and uncertainty and turn it against the Jewish people. Our organization's researchers found 5 common threads in this process, which I wanted to tell you about. First of all, the Jews have been described as the virus itself. We are the parasite that is infecting and destroying all we touch. In this regard, anti-Semites are using Nazi imagery, accusing Jews of being the actual rodents and vermins. And if you think back to the Nazi images you're all familiar with, the same thing is still happening online. Second, the Jews manufactured the virus in order to weaken their enemies and control the world. We see this claim specifically in countries like coming from Iran and Turkey, where, for example, the protocols of the Elders of Zion myth is very strong. And one of the claims we've seen is that Zionists, in fact, and I couldn't believe this one, Zionists unleashed a wave of drones into these countries and sprayed them with the coronavirus. Third, we're seeing, and linked to the second points, we're seeing Jews being accused as being murderers of Arabs and using old anti-Semitic tropes and images like the blood libel. The social media imagery displays Jews as bloodthirsty murderers of Arab peoples. And the fourth is that Jews are profiteers of the virus, which is, of course, one of the most ridiculous notions that Jews not only invented the virus, so not only did we invent it, not only do we carry it, but we actually have a cure, and when we release it, we're going to profit from it. And this is being even elicited from the actual BDS movement that had a whole internal debate about the virus. Should the Jews find a cure? Should we use their cure? Should we use it? And their debate resulted in, yes, we should use it, which is interesting in and of itself. And fifth, the fifth libel that we're seeing now on social media is that Jews are deserving of death due to the coronavirus. And this, of course, speaks to itself. And so, the organization has created a full report on this very, very important issue of how anti-Semitism is linked to the coronavirus. You could find it on our website if you'd like to. And you can see some of the graphics that we've pulled off of the internet associated with it. Our website, for all of you that don't know, is FSWC.ca, and it's under the anti-Semitism tab, and you can read all of this horrendous stuff. And for our part is obviously we've now sent this report to the law enforcement agencies that we work with, to the police forces, so that they're aware and they can track some of these hate groups when they are here, at least in our country, in Canada. And of course, we're sharing it with the educators and the boards of education at large, so that it becomes more prominent and well known. As you know, when we educate about anti-Semitism, we find that it makes a difference. And this, of course, does. So this is part of what our organization has been involved with. And, you know, behind me, you can see the picture of the Tour for Humanity when we took it a couple years ago in Ottawa. And we're very proud of this program. Even though it's now resting and it's not deployed, you can be assured that our educators are doing this work every single day. Now, I'd like to now, and without further ado, pass the torch of what I'm speaking about to our chairman, Freddie Wax, who I have to say has been an unbelievable supporter of our organization. Behind the scene, he does so much for us, and out in front in the community. So Freddie, if I can hand the microphone over to you, and then we'll introduce our keynote speaker.
Thank you, Avi, and thank you, Einat, for being with us today. You know, Avi and I were discussing as to what's going on in the world before I get to my speaking notes, and I'll try to make them very brief, that other institutions within our community and the hospitals, where I am the chair of one of the major hospitals in Toronto, are all fundraising in a very large way in spite of the uncertainty of our own balance sheets and what's going on, but people understand the need. And to speak to the community's needs, Federation is doing a $25 million special emergency fund. And it's not to advocate what they're doing, but just to talk about what others are doing and the need and how it's recognized. And this is the first emergency campaign that has been done in Toronto where the proceeds aren't going to Israel. And of the 25 million on Sunday night, they had a Zoomcast which raised $15 million alone. So with that, and with again, I guess our sensibilities of having watched, I guess, The Man in the High Castle and the Fauda and other things that pertain to the Jewish people and what's going on with all the free time in between conference calls. It's interesting how in a world where fascism seems to be rife upon us, that the Jews seem to be the center of attention. And in that regard, with your support, we are showing the world that advocacy, education, and teamwork can overcome any threat to our community. Your contribution to our mission has never been more important than it is today. Tough times call for tougher measures, which is why we are launching a special fundraising campaign to strengthen our response. In the weeks and months ahead, our team will continue to rise to the occasion and fight the anti-Semitism arising from the coronavirus pandemic. We have full confidence that FSWC will deploy its uniquely strategic and innovative practice to defend, protect our community, in large part due to your continued generosity. Our team is meeting around the clock to battle the surge in anti-Semitism with COVID-19. We're speaking with law enforcement, government leaders, media, and educators to prevent the disturbing online hateful rhetoric and imagery we are seeing on a daily basis, most reminiscent of Nazi Germany. In our steadfast endeavor to speak out in defense of our community, FSWC has been cited in the mainstream media widely in editorials and news reports in an effort to educate and advocate against COVID-19 related anti-Semitism. Releasing reports to law enforcement, redeploying our education department to develop online educational programs and live workshops to counter defamation and libel connecting to the pandemic. Standing with Holocaust survivors to ensure their health and well-being and that they are not being traumatized once again by the surge in anti-Semitism. Expanding our online resource material footprint and upgrading content in our website in the areas of anti-Semitism, Holocaust education, and the new curriculum. Engaging with the community leaders across the country and healthcare providers to counterbalance anti-Semitic accusations with fact and knowledge. exposing anti-Israel and anti-Semitic groups taking advantage of the pandemic to recruit and propagandize. Let's not let economic and social instability empower hate groups again. History shows that our resolve must be doubly engaged and determined, especially in tumultuous times. That's why you can count on us to stand for our community and for you day and night. We're hoping that we can continue counting on your amazing generosity, support this important special campaign. Join us at any donation amount, including monthly contributions, by visiting our website today and making a gift you would like with any of our staff members, or please email us at AWACS, that's not FWACS, that's my daughter, at FSW.ca, or eCorn, K-O-R-N-E, FSWCA. Thank you for being a part of our community, and as we face this pandemic, COVID-19, and fight the surge of anti-Semitism. Just as you have always been there for us, we will be here for you, your family, and our community during these difficult times. Thank you. And Avi, particularly the amount of time that we've been spending and the coverage that you've been getting to advocate for the Jewish community, for Israel, and us on a worldwide basis, I thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you. Thank you, Freddie, so much. We thank you from the bottom of our hearts because it's about leadership. I know many of you also on this call are part of the organization's leadership, and I do want to thank you all for the continued support. You're all very important to this organization, and also the fact that you're here on a nice sunny day as well shows how much you care about Israel and about these issues. So I want to thank you all of you who are here on the phone, really and truly. Now, it gives me tremendous pleasure and honor to introduce someone that I've actually wanted to host for a very long time. I have been following your career, Einat, and that is Dr. Einat Wilf. She is a leading thinker on matters of foreign policy, economics, education, Israel, and Zionism. She was a member of the Israeli parliament from 2010 to 2013, where she served as chair of the Education Committee and member of the influential Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee. In the past, she served as foreign policy advisor to Vice Prime Minister Shimon Peres and a strategic consultant with McKinsey & Company. Dr. Wilf has a BA from Harvard, an MBA from INSEAD in France, and a PhD in political science from the University of Cambridge. Dr. Wilf is the author of 6 books that explore key issues in Israeli society. And as I've already articulated, we're going to talk about her new book that I understand is #1 on the bestseller list. I think that's what it is. And it's entitled, what is it entitled? The War of Return, How Western Indulgence of the Palestinian Dream Has Obstructed the Path to Peace. So before we welcome, I just want to do a side note here. If there's any questions for Dr. Wilf, I think what we should try to do, there's a chat piece on this Zoom. If you can write your questions in the chat and we'll try to circle back to them. I hope that that works. If not, then we'll just ask it verbally. And please just note that this Zoom conference call is being recorded for others who couldn't be here today. So without further ado, Dr. Wilf, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you so much for having me here. It's truly a pleasure. So indeed, I want to tell you a little bit about the War of Return, how it's doing, and why I even wrote the book with my co-writer, Adi Schwartz. So I grew up in Israel. I grew up politically in the Israeli left, a supporter of the Labor Party. I worked with people like Shimon Peres, with Yossi Beilin, the architect of the Oslo Accords. And when I grew up, the Israeli political left was really known for one main thing. And it was known for a formula, for almost a mathematical equation, which said there is a path to peace, and it's very simple. All Israel has to do is hand over territory that it acquired as a result of the 1967 Six-Day War. We're talking the Sinai Peninsula, the Golan Heights, the West Bank and Gaza. All Israel has to do is hand over that territory or some of it, and in return, Israel should expect to get peace. This was known as the Land for Peace formula. And it had the elegance of simplicity and truly a great promise. Now, for a while, it seemed to work beautifully. I was one of those kids that they took out of elementary school to wave flags for the motorcade of Anwar Sadat, the Egyptian president, who came to speak in the Israeli Knesset. He spoke in the Israeli Knesset. Think of it, an Arab leader, the greatest nation. He spoke of peace. And within 2 years of that speech, he gets the entire Sinai Peninsula, twice the size of Israel, and signs a peace agreement with Israel. More than 40 years later, we can have an interesting discussion of whether what we have with Egypt should properly be called peace. But at the time, it seemed to work. Land for peace. In the 90s, I'm sure many of you remember it, as a general mood of the 90s, with the fall of the Soviet Union, there was a general sense of euphoria, certainly with our region. Israel was negotiating with Syria over the Golan Heights. We signed a peace agreement with Jordan once Jordan gave up its claim to the West Bank, and we negotiated with the PLO over the West Bank and Gaza. So the sense for me and for many, many Israelis at the time of the Israeli left, of the peace camp, is this is it. We're done. We're implementing this formula of land for peace, and peace is going to be at hand. It's around the corner. And this culminates in the year 2000. Ehud Barak goes to Camp David, very symbolic, the place we signed the agreement with Egypt, negotiated the agreement with Egypt. He offers the Palestinians, led at the time by Arafat, a state. We forget the offer today. It was a fully independent state controlling its borders in the West Bank, in Gaza, no settlement in sight, end to the occupation, capital in East Jerusalem, including the old city or parts of it. This was unprecedented. And we were led to believe that this was what the Palestinians wanted. He puts this proposal on the table, Clinton supports it, and they walk away. This repeats itself in 2008 under Ehud Olmert. This time Abu Mazen gets an even more generous proposal, but the same idea, walks away. And the question was then, what do they want? What do the Palestinians want? Because they could have had a state, and we're not talking 1947. These are times that I'm politically aware. This is 2000, this is 2008. They walk away. They walk away and they follow it by a bloody, murderous campaign of massacre, of suicide bombings, cafes, buses, entire families being blown up. The question was, what do they want? And this led me and Adi, and again, this is a journey that many in the Israeli peace camp went through, to realize that we've had it wrong all the time. That essentially hiding in plain sight was a very simple Palestinian message. What we want is Palestine from the river to the sea. That's the Palestinian message. An Arab Palestine, at best with a Jewish minority, from the river to the sea. They say it again and again. And this is really encapsulated in what they call the right of return, which is neither a right, and it's not a return. By now, we're talking about millions of Palestinians who claim that right. They've never been in Israel. They were not born there. And they claim to want to settle there in the name of this right of return. And the right of return today is the key issue by which Palestinians essentially maintain their demand that what they want is a Palestine from the river to the sea, which is why, for example, when Palestinian leaders, and all of them say that, when they say that they support a two-state solution, and many of us think, oh, then we can have peace, they immediately say, or especially if asked, what about the right of return? And they say, well, that's holy, that's sacred, that's non-negotiable. That belongs to every Palestinian in perpetuity. And the implication is that the only two states they support in their two-state solution is a Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza, and a Palestinian state to replace Israel. There is essentially, and has never been, any Palestinian leader, any Palestinian NGO even, any Palestinian op-ed writer who offered a solution where a sovereign state for the Jewish people is allowed to stand. Whether it's two states with return, or a one-state solution, or an armed struggle, the bottom line is, in the Palestinian and broadly the Arab and Islamic conception of the Jews do not have political rights. The Jews as a collective do not have the right as a nation and a people to sovereignty, and certainly not in the land of Israel, where it is denied that they have any history and any connection and any sense of being a people which is connected to this land. And Adi and I basically set out to answer a simple question in the book. How is it that from a war that ended over 70 years ago, we just marked Israel's Independence Day, 72 years of independence, how is it that a war that ended more than 7 years ago can be said to have more than 5 million refugees who were not born when the war happened, who do not live where the war happened? And the bottom line that we've reached was that from the Palestinian perspective, the war is not over. It's never been over. Israel might have won the battle in 1948, but it is merely temporary. And the vision continues to be that the Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel is a historical aberration, it's temporary, and it will ultimately be undone. I spoke about the peace with Egypt, the so-called peace with Egypt. Every Ramadan, Egypt has these TV series. Egypt remains one of the main exporters to the Arab and Islamic world of heavy anti-Semitic content. And their TV series now for Ramadan begins with a future in which Israel has been demolished, Jerusalem freed. So they do not just look at it as an issue of the past, they very much look at it as a vision for the future. And I'll just end by saying that much of our book focuses on Western policy with respect to this issue. We highlight the Palestinian vision, but ultimately our accusations are against the West, countries like Canada, that continue to indulge and to fund and to turn a blind eye towards this Palestinian vision, thinking that somehow they don't mean it or it's not realistic, not understanding how serious the Arab world and the Palestinians are about this vision, so serious that they're willing again and again to forgo having their own state so that they can keep fighting for a future where they can have Palestine from the river to the sea. So let me end with that as opening remarks, and so we have enough time for questions.
Einat, that was very interesting, very well spoken. My question is this. Could you talk a little bit more about the content of the book describing the Western world's views on all of this and the fallacy of the Western world view on what the Arabs really want?
So one of the things that we found very interesting and frustrating with respect to the Western world is a view that we've come to call a neo-colonial view. And I've even invented a word for it. I call it West-plaining. I don't know if the word mansplaining has become very known. It's when men explain to women what they actually think or should think. And in the same way, Westerners often explain away what Palestinians say very clearly. Palestinians will say, from the river to the sea. Palestinian will say, the right of return is holy. I can tell you that the book has been so far very well received with some very good reviews. Yesterday, there was a very angry Palestinian review of the book. And one of the interesting things that is in the review is that as much as he's angry about the book, he is confirming the main thesis of the book. In fact, he is confirming it so much so that he's calling it the sun rising in the east. He calls it obvious. In many ways, his rebuke is to Israelis, to the West, that says, what do you think we've been demanding all this time? How could you think that this is not what we wanted? So the Palestinians are very clear, and to their credit, have been consistent for over 70 years and have been consistent for over a century in their utter and complete rejection of any notion that the Jewish people have political rights, have the rights to sovereignty, to be masters of their fate. This goes to a very historical view of Jews in the Arab world and Islam, that Jews can be tolerated as long as they are a certain kind of Jew, but they cannot be accepted once they are a Zionist kind of Jew, once they're the Jew that demands political rights, that demands to be recognized as an equal, as someone who does not let others determine whether they live or die. So in this neo-colonial West-planing attitude of the West, the Palestinians will speak clearly. They will say, Palestine from the river to the sea, we demand return. And then Westerners will West-plane them away. Canada has a main role in that. It had people dealing with the refugee issue on Palestinians, saying things like, they know it's not going to happen. They understand that it's not realistic. And often in my meetings with European Western diplomats, I have to tell them, look, they're incredibly rational. They're probably the more rational side in this conflict. They open a map, they see a world of 500 million Arabs, nearly 1.5 billion Muslims in the region. To their credit, ever since the 7th century, they've been very successful. It's an Arab and Islamic region. In the middle, they see 7 million Jews struggling to survive as a political sovereign entity. And they conclude, not irrationally from their perspective, that this is not going to last. So they will say to themselves, we'll wait another generation, another 5 generations. But ultimately, this will be ours. Why compromise? And one of the most difficult things that we're trying to do, and the book is intended to help in that, is to get Westerners to treat Arabs and Palestinians as equals and give them the respect of taking them at their word. Not to explain it away, but to understand that Arabs and Palestinians are agents of history. They know what they're fighting for. They're willing to suffer for that. Gaza, for example, is not a mess because of some outside conditions. It's a mess because the people who live in Gaza, 80% of whom are registered as refugees from Palestine, even though they live in Gaza, which we can all agree is Palestine, they view themselves as refugees from Palestine. Despite living in Gaza, they are indulged by the West in that worldview. And to them, Gaza is not home. They might be by now a 5th generation born in Gaza. It doesn't matter. Gaza is merely a temporary foothold to be in until they take Palestine from the river to the sea. So the book is very much about saying, look, if we are ever to have peace, and the book does not say this is not possible, it is possible, but it will only be possible if the Palestinians and the Arabs understand that Israel is here to stay, that the Jews are a people with equal right to self-determination as every other nation, and that the West will no longer indulge and underwrite and pay for an organization such as UNRWA, which sustains the Palestinians in their view that Israel is a temporary aberration in the Arab and Islamic history of the region since the 7th century.
So we have a number of questions. Thank you very much, Einat, for that very concise answer. I want to read out, and again, if there are questions, please put them in the chat. And perhaps it'll help if I go through a few questions and you can answer them all together. The first couple here is from Terry Wallman. He's asking, is this denial of Palestinians coming from their leadership of the common man on the street? How significant today is Peace Now movement? Is Joe Biden's viewpoint dangerously imbued with the thinking of the need to indulge the Palestinians? So that's from Terry Wallman. Darren Brown asks, is it fair to say the left came to realize that the right already knew what the right already knew, which actually was my question too, Darren, because that's what it sounds like to me. It's, you know, it's kind of coming from a right perspective, which actually it might be helpful if the left is coming to terms with it now. And Philip Lieberman is asking, I'd say it slightly differently. What we on the, I'm reading you, what we on the right have always known is that the Palestinians wouldn't know what to do with peace.
I'd love to address the issue of the leadership and the common man, because this is almost an ancient myth. The idea of the common man who desires peace, but is a pawn or is hijacked by an evil leadership. And one of the things we show in the book, and by the way, the modern kind of version of that is the Palestinians in Gaza only want to have a job and to have food and to have better conditions, but Hamas, evil Hamas, is hijacking Gaza, and that's why it's a mess. So we saw it at the beginning. The book goes through the history. And one of the things we show is that the Palestinian refugees, the Arab refugees, in the wake of 1948, are themselves the most extreme element in rejecting any kind of notion that the war is over. So, for example, Jordan is willing to come to terms with Israel, is willing to sign an agreement with Israel in the wake of the war. King Abdallah is assassinated by a Palestinian for this worldview. It is the refugees themselves who reject any resettlement, any financial aid. They want only one thing, another war to undo 1948. So they are by far the most extreme element in the Arab world in general. They are sustained in their view by the Arab world and later by the West. Their leadership merely reflects that. And this is true to the present. If anything, the leadership has tried to be a little more moderate, but they are ultimately constrained by what is the most fundamental ethos to the Palestinian identity. To be a Palestinian and to be a refugee from Palestine is basically the same thing. So this is really their sense of identity. And it's not, there's this view in the West, this is the West planing that I spoke about, that the demand for a right of return is merely a bargaining chip. Now, this is the view that perhaps could have been held in the 80s and 90s. But once the Palestinians walk away from the opportunity to have a state in the 2000, 2008, they did not use this bargaining chip. And in fact, they did the exact opposite. They bargained away a state in order to keep fighting for return. And both Arafat and Abu Mazen knew that they had no leeway, and we include many quotes in the book, they had no leeway from their people to take a stand against return. And this is why one of our main recommendations in the book is to the West, is to say, look, if you want another leadership to ever emerge, a leadership that would accept the Jewish people, their rights, and the fact that they're here to stay, this leadership will never emerge as long as you indulge the people as a whole in their vision of from the river to the sea. The people need to understand that it's not going to happen. And we show a parallel example to the German refugees who were expelled in the wake of World War II from Poland, from Czechoslovakia. And the only reason that the Germans had a leader later who said to those refugees, enough, we're not going to get Poland back, it's over. The only reason they had a Willy Brandt is that no one was willing to take any of it. The US, the West, no one was going to indulge a German view that they need to take back Poland. So in the same way, we need the same strict view that tells Palestinians the places where the state of Israel exists are not going to be yours anymore, ever. Forget it. Move on. We're basically asking for a simple message to come from the West. Move on. It's over. Now, a bit on the politics here, a few of the questions. The Peace Now camp in Israel has been decimated, obviously, because the elegance of its formula of land for peace has been disproven. Now, what are you going to campaign on? Yes, we should negotiate with the Palestinians. We'll offer them a Palestinian state, but it's not going to lead anywhere. That's not a very great message to have a political campaign on. There is now about zero credibility for anyone trying to propose that the path to peace is to negotiate with the Palestinians over the handing over of land. So in that sense, the peace camp, or let's say the camp that thinks that the reason we don't have peace is because Israel hasn't done enough or hasn't gone far enough, is, I don't know, 3 seats in parliament. But to speak to the right, so it's true that the left has come to acknowledge the right-wing view that the Palestinian demands are not for a state in part of the land, but for all of it. But this does not translate, and in that sense, the right wing has been decimated. It has not translated into an all-out support for settlement building or for a full annexation, because by and large, the vast majority of Jews in Israel look at the map, look at the numbers, and they understand that the only way to secure a Zionist state with a solid Jewish majority is not to make citizens of another 2-3 million Palestinians and to allow them to have their own political control. And this is why, and this is a bit to politics right now, the Israeli government that might be formed from blue and white and Likud basically reflects a broad consensus, certainly on this issue, which has emerged as a result of the last 2 decades, where Israelis no longer believe in peace now, but they're not gung-ho supporters of settlement and annexation. They want to secure Israel, and they want the Palestinians to govern themselves without threatening Israel to the extent possible. And the question is how to square that circle. In terms of Biden, Biden himself, of course, is a great friend of Israel, but there are very worrying trends in the Democratic Party. We've seen them, of course, in the UK, in the Labour Party, where virulent anti-Zionism is used as a very thin veil for anti-Semitism and translates into that. And in that sense, I think we've all benefited from the UK example because I think now people are much more wary. They're not likely to be as sanguine about these developments in the Democratic Party. They're fighting more and better and earlier, but it is a concern. I can tell you that specifically with the issues in our book, the Trump administration defunded UNRWA, the main structure that sustains the Palestinians in their belief that Israel is temporary. It was not done well. The money was just pulled out without creating international political support for it. In that sense, we call it in the book a missed opportunity. But we can tell you that when we meet with the European countries that continue to fund UNRWA, and that also includes Canada, they think that the American defunding of UNRWA is temporary. They expect there to be a Democratic president and for the money to come back. They don't think this represents a real shift in the American policy, and they expect the money to come back with Biden. And one of the things we hope to do with the book is to show that this would be wrong, and that America should actually push forward with getting other countries. We know that countries like Australia, Switzerland, the Netherlands might be amenable to also getting out of UNRWA and to basically send a message of we're more than happy to help the Palestinians, but not by nurturing a belief that Israel is provisional and temporary.
Thank you, Einat. That's a wonderful answer. Just looking to see if there are any other questions here. If you have any questions, please write them down. Einat, I'm curious to know, obviously the book is giving advice to Western democracies about how to treat the Palestinians, or basically to stop treating them the way they have been in order to try to create peace. But do you believe that that can happen, firstly? And secondly is, will there be peace? Do most Israelis and Palestinians still believe in a two-state solution? What does the future hold? How do the two sides see the next 20 years?
So I think in many ways, in the word two-state solution, what Israelis are less likely to believe in is in the word solution. And because of this being stuck, my colleague Mika Goodman called it Catch 67, that Israelis don't want to annex the West Bank, realizing that they would condemn themselves to being a Jewish minority in an Arab state. But they also understand that withdrawing from it will threaten them physically. They're stuck. And for many Israelis, the present situation is about as good as it gets. If people want to understand, for example, the secret to Netanyahu's longevity is it's in one figure. The number of soldiers who died in the last year as a result of violent conflict is 0, which is the lowest since the IDF was founded. This is a number that might not make headlines in the international press, but it is felt by Israelis. So what Israelis have had for the past decade is not peace, but they've had peacefulness. People are basically not dying, or very few are dying from violent conflict between Jews and Arabs in the land. And for many Israelis, this is what we can have, and let's go with that. The interesting development, I saw that there was also a question on Iran, is that we are experiencing a moment where, because of Iran, because of the developments since the Arab Spring, the Arab world is slowly, I wouldn't pop the champagne bottles yet, but the Arab world is slowly losing interest in anti-Zionism and in the Palestinian cause as the cause of the Arab world. the notion that to be an Arab is to be an anti-Zionist is losing some of its power. We're certainly seeing it in the Gulf states, in Saudi, where you're beginning to hear voices that are saying things not just interest-based. They're not saying things like, we need Israel against Iran. They're actually beginning to change the story. They're saying things like, why do we have problems with Jews on the land? Islam accepts all three scriptures. In many ways, when they speak up, they speak in much stronger terms against the Palestinians. They clearly talk about the scam or the racket that they've been running for the last 7 years in this ever inflating numbers of Palestinian so-called refugees. They're much stronger when they speak and saying, enough, we're done with it. So the tragedy of what's happening in the West today is that at the moment when these developments are happening in the Arab world, I mean, this is still not the dominant narrative. The dominant narrative in the Arab world is still that Israel is temporary and will one day disappear, and that it's an imperial, evil interloper of lands that do not belong to it. But we're beginning to hear a different voice and different voices. But at that moment, many in the West are rushing in to tell the Palestinians, no, no, keep fighting for your rights. When a Westerner says rights, they think about some universal version of human rights. When a Palestinian says, I'm fighting for my rights, it's one right. It's the right of return. It's no Israel. Palestinians claim to fight for justice. A Canadian, a Westerner might say justice. Of course we're for justice. But for Palestinians, there's only one justice. The justice which corrects the injustice, which is the establishment of the state of Israel. So the tragedy is that the West is rushing to underwrite and to sustain this Palestinian vision at the very moment when some in the Arab world are moving away from it. And if we are to have peace, I sometimes quote Chazal, the Jewish sages, that you will not finish the job, but it doesn't give you the right to refrain from doing it. So I don't know if it will be in my lifetime, but I think we have a responsibility to try to make it sooner rather than later. And the sooner we can get the Palestinians to understand that no one supports from the river to the sea, that they no longer have their automatic support in the Arab world, that they no longer have the West sustaining that people do want to support them if they want political rights for themselves in some of the land, but they're not willing to support them if what they want is no state for the Jewish people. The sooner we can get them to do that, the sooner we can have a leadership that will come to the Jewish people, to the state of Israel, and say, enough, we're done, we understand that it's not going to be from the river to the sea, and we're ready to negotiate on this basis as two distinct peoples who want to govern themselves, but not destroy the other.
And that was a wonderful, wonderful last piece there. And I have to tell you, your analysis is right on, because I've felt this way personally and professionally for a very long time. We see this kind of thing on university campuses where students themselves believe in social justice, and they don't really understand what they're saying. When they partner up with the Palestinians and they say social justice, they don't understand that it means the destruction of Israel and loss of rights and freedoms, especially to women and to LGBTQ and others that they care about. And so really it's an uphill battle that we have to get them to understand what that social justice means. Your thesis on the indulgence of the West toward the Palestinians, I think is accurate and true. And, it's our jobs here in the West, I think, to try to educate our governments about the reality of what's going on the ground and what it is that they are actually saying and meaning when they say that. And so I actually have not had a chance to read your book yet, but I'm looking forward to reading it because I'm looking forward to understanding that thesis a little more. And we'll send your book out to some of these government officials as well to get them to understand. So I know there were some other questions, but we're unfortunately out of time, and I wanted to thank you on behalf of the entire organization, Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center, this group, and hopefully we can have you again for some further analysis.
With pleasure, always.
Thank you. And thank you everybody for joining us today. Shavua Tov, have a good week, and I look forward to seeing you all again. Thank you.
Thank you.